Speech Act theory attempts to explain how speakers use language to accomplish intended actions and how listeners determine that intended meaning from what is said. Speech Act theory takes a close look at what we say, how we say it, and in what it really means. Speech Act theory was first proposed in 1962 by British philosopher John Langsall Austin in his book entitled How to Do Things with Words. Austin argued that statements can not only be used to describe some state of affair or state of fact, but also express commands, wishes, or decrees. For instance, John is president is a statement of fact, but this statement is changed into a speech act when saying, I nominate John for president. Nominating John for president is a speech act because the action, the nomination, must be taken in order for this statement to be complete. Austin also proposed that what we say has three different types of meaning. The first type of meaning is locutionary meaning, which is the literal meaning of what is said. It's hot in here. The second type of meaning is illocutionary meaning, which is, quote, the social function is what is said, or in simpler terms, what the statement really means. It's hot in here could be an indirect request for someone to open the window, or an indirect refusal to close the window so the temperature can cool down. It's hot in here could also be a subtle lecture to say that someone shouldn't leave the window open all day. Illocutionary acts have many meanings and are a central concept of speech act theory. The last type of meaning is prelocutionary meaning, which is the effect of what is said. The utterance of, it's hot in here, could result in someone opening or closing the window. Overall, speech acts result in some sort of action being taken as an influence of the statement. J.L. Austin was not the only philosopher to explore the theory of speech acts. John R. Searle extended Austin's speech act theory by adding 5 ways to classify illocutionary speech acts. Assertives, speech acts that commit the speaker to the truth of a proposition, such as a prayer. Directives, speech acts that cause the listener to take a particular action, such as requests or advice. Commissives, speech acts that commit a speaker to a future action, such as promises. And expressives, speech acts that express the speaker's attitudes or emotion towards a proposition, like congratulations or thanks. And finally, declaratives, speech acts that change the reality in accordance to the proposition of the statements. So baptisms, marriages, or arrests. Furthermore, Searle also introduced the notion of indirect speech acts. Indirect speech acts are commonly used to reject proposals and make requests. For example, if someone asks, would you like to hang out this Wednesday? And you reply, I have class, you are using an indirect speech act to reject the initial proposal of hanging out. This is an indirect speech act because the literal meaning of I have class does not entitle any sort of rejection, but the intended meaning of the message is a rejection. Throughout the years, there have been many extensions to the speech act theory, and most of the extensions line up with Austin's original theory. However, many theorists and philosophers have constantly debated one critical point of the theory: what constitutes as a speech act? As we've already discovered, J.L. Austin suggests that a speech act is any statement or utterance that has a performative purpose. However, John Searle proposes that a speech act is any statement or utterance that has a performative purpose and that performance is carried out. So for example, I promise to clean the dishes is a speech act according to Austin. However, according to Searle, I promise to clean the dishes is not a speech act until the dishes are actually clean. So a statement cannot become a speech act until the action is carried out. Speech act theory isn't just something we learn in our communications theories class. It's something that is demonstrated every day in how we interact with each other. The current political debates have been the main focus of many news stations for a countless amount of months. And one candidate is using speech acts to incite violence for his supporters. On Wednesday, March 16, 2016, Donald Trump warned fellow Republicans that if he lost the GOP nomination, that, and I quote, you'd have riots. So while Trump can claim that he's simply making a prediction of future behavior, and he has claimed that, supporters and his opposition will hear the prediction as an invitation and a threat, respectively, because of speech acts. To his supporters, he's indirectly saying, if they don't give me the nomination, you know what to do. And to his opposition, he's indirectly saying, that is what will happen when you gang up on me. And this isn't the first time that Trump has used indirect speech acts in order to promote and back the violence from his supporters. Speech acts are not only used in politics, but they're being discussed in a more shocking situation, which is pornography. So in 1987, Catherine McNean claimed that pornography violates women's rights to free speech. In a recent article by Jennifer Saul, entitled Pornography, Speech Acts, and Context, she claims that works of pornography can be understood as illocutionary acts for subordinating women and for silencing them. In her article, she focuses more on violent and degrading pornography more than the socially acceptable forms of pornography, so it's not said, she hasn't studied it in all contexts. But she claims that pornography subordinates women by ranking them as inferior and also, quote, creating a communicative environment that derives them from the illocutionary potential. That how people portray those acts and female submissiveness is what can cause a deprivation of speech acts and of the word no. As we've already established, using no to refuse a sexual advance is a speech act because you're using no in a way to achieve something through a performative act. So while speech act theory is easier to apply to a contemporary context, I do not think it's a theory that can stand the test of time. Speech act theory only brings up more questions and has very few answers. Specifically, speech act theory says that a performative action needs to be implied in order for the statement to be a speech act. But if the action never happens, does that still make it a speech act? Most theorists and philosophers have chimed in with their 2 cents on this matter, and each has put forth a different conclusion. J.L. Austin says yes, even if an action isn't performed, what makes a speech act is that implied action, that you wanted something to happen by saying that. However, John Searle says no. If an action does not follow the statement in the near future, then the statement is no longer a speech act, and that goes back to the reference of clean dishes. However, philosophers Ken Botch and Robert Harness both say that speech acts are only successful if the recipient understands the true intention behind the meaning and then successfully performs that action as requested. So their point of view is completely different because it focuses on the recipient's side while others focus on the sender. Yet all of these opinions still fall under speech act theory. Each philosopher has their own extension of the theory, and each extension is almost completely different from the last. How can a theory be deemed valid when there are several different aspects involved and none of them can be scientifically proven? To say that someone will follow your speech act cannot be scientifically proven. To say that you intended for a speech act to even occur cannot be scientifically proven. Furthermore, what predictive properties does this theory have? Speech act theory gives a name to a small phenomenon, but does not predict future events or behavior. Speech act theory is not a repetitious theory. The same thing does not happen over and over again, and the language that is being tested is ambiguous and has multiple meanings. And as we've already seen, "it's hot in here" can have multiple meanings. Do you want a window open? Do you want the window closed? Is this a statement of anger or joy? Is this a lecture about keeping my window open for too long during the summer? Speech acts almost depend on the context in which the statement is said, and the theory fails to take that into consideration. Speech act theory does not take into consideration nonverbal. If I think it's cold in my room and I start to shiver, and my roommate goes and turns up the heat or hands me a blanket, that an illocutionary act because a prelocutionary act followed it? I may have started shivering with the intention of having someone give me a blanket or to turn up the heat. So there was intention behind my actions, but because it wasn't a verbal statement, does the theory still apply? And that's one of the questions that I feel this theory brings up. What specifically is an illocutionary act? And the failure to include nonverbal communication in this theory suggests a lack of substantiality within the theory, because roughly 93% of our communication is nonverbal. So how can a theory not account for that much of our communication skills? So that leads me to the final part of this presentation, the theory extension. So through this theory extension, nonverbal communication will be added into the structure of speech theory. Most of our communication is done through nonverbal communication, and more specifically body language. To go back to the previous example, if someone is shivering because they think the room is cold and someone responds to those nonverbals by turning up the heat, this is still a speech act because the intention to become warmer, whether that's, getting a blanket or turning up the heat, was still implied. Furthermore, studies have shown that staring is more likely to get people to do things. So if I'm staring at my friend's food and they wordlessly give me a couple pieces, that interaction has gone through all the stages of speech act theory. There just wasn't words involved. The locutionary act was made through the simple nonverbal of staring. The illocutionary act in meaning was translated as, I would like some of your food, or I am hungry. And the prelocutionary act was made through the other person offering their food. And again, this whole transition happened non-verbally. No words were exchanged. So the entire theory was acted out, so it's my belief that nonverbal communication can be integrated into this theory. So let me use another example. The nonverbal come on sign can also elicit an illocutionary meaning. The hand gesture has multiple meanings in the United States and in other countries. For example, in Asia, it's considered highly offensive to use the come on hand gesture to a person because it should only be used to beckon a dog to you. However, when applied in the right context in the United States, the come on hand motion will elicit a preclusionary action of the person coming over to you. And a heavy sigh can get someone to ask you what's wrong, just like the unusual silence can when used with the intention of seeking attention. Those both have prelocutionary acts that follow them, which is someone asking you what's wrong. So the is the locutionary act, because it can simply be a sigh. However, with the intention of seeking attention and wanting someone to ask you what's wrong, the illocutionary meaning is brought forward. And then when someone finally asks you what's wrong, the prelocutionary act is followed. The intention that you wanted was fulfilled. Overall, by adding this new construct to the theory, we are able to apply this theory to more than just 7% of our communication.